now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marianne Feldheim, the director of our School of Public Administration, whose leadership has really been instrumental in not only the development of this series, but in the development of our master's program in urban and regional planning as well. Marianne.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming on this gloomy morning, and it's nice that it's so bright in here. I want to say a few words about the Master's in Master of Science in Urban and Regional Planning. This is our third year. We have a cohort model, so we have 3 cohorts going through, and this May we will graduate our first students. And we're very proud to say that almost all of them are employed in the field at this time. So once I graduate, it'll be even better. I would like to take a moment to tell you about the program. We have, when we looked at this, it's interdisciplinary in nature, and the overview really was to approach planning from a very large, broad perspective. We have 3 concentrations, and the lecture series has focused on those. The first was Planning Healthy Communities, and we had Dr. Catherine Ross this year. The second is Environmental Planning, and we're so thrilled to have Senator Graham and to be talking about the water issue. And the third is Transportation, and we will have that coming up in April, and you can see that it's right there. I would like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about some of the projects that the students are working on. We use service learning, and service learning is where you apply what you learn in the classroom to a real setting. And Dr. Chris Hawkins, and Dr. Hawkins, if you'll stand, please. He is the coordinator for the program and teaching the capstone class. And in the capstone class, they're working with the city of Windermere, and the students are actually coming up with recommendations. They're working with the citizens, the mayor, the commission, to come up with recommendations on how to advance one of their parks. We're also doing a project with Bithlo, and our students in the Planning Healthy Communities class are doing a meta-analysis of all the studies on Bithlo and some recommendations to go forward. We have several students here today, so if our students will stand, please. I know you're there. You can't hide. And we also have other faculty members besides Dr. Hawkins. We have April Fisher, who is right here. And April is coordinating a mentors program that we have between planners in the community and our students. So she has left information at the front. If you are interested at the end, please contact April about the potential of serving as a mentor for one of our students. It's a great opportunity for you and for our students. We also have Dr. Thomas Breyer in the back, who is the director of our Center for Public and Nonprofit Management, and Maria Elena Augustine, who is the assistant director in the back. If you'd like to learn more about that, we did bring our publication, which is the Public Administration Focus. It's out front if you didn't pick one up, to learn about the center and our programs. And as I wrap up, we do have an upcoming research conference in public administration. It was this flyer. It is on April 5th, so we hope that you will consider it. It's the policies and planning of healthy communities. That's the focus that is coming up. A couple of things about the format. We will have a presentation by Senator Graham, and then we will have discussion with the panel and interaction. The way that we are going to be doing this is that we have applied for AICP credits, but there is no evaluation. So when you apply for your AICP credits, there will be an evaluation form when you apply. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jim Sellen, who has been probably the strongest friend that this program has had from the very beginning. He had a vision and really has helped to take us where we are, and I'm sure he will take us to greater heights. So, Jim?
Thank you, Mary Ann. Good morning, everyone. The university and some of the sort of commercial messages that you heard are actually incredibly important. This university is a laboratory for studying growth management and planning issues, and that partnership between the university and this community is incredibly important. And our firm has invested in it heavily. We want other planning firms and other firms to do the same. So please see Mary Ann or Michael Frumpkin or any of the members of the faculty and talk to them about how you can help with this program. I want to start with a little context. We've already been having a pretty healthy debate at our table. If nothing else, it was worth just hearing some of that. But a white paper was done recently, and Shelley Lawton is somewhere in the audience. Raise your hand, Shelley. Between my region and the Urban Land Institute to look at the issue of water supply. And just contextually, we basically came up with a theme that clean sources or current sources of clean, affordable, and high-quality water are not sufficient to meet the future demands of this region. And that means that in just a few years, maybe as early as 2018, by some estimates, and that's what we have right now, our estimates, parts of the region will be forced to pull water from sources they're not using now, and those alternative water supplies will be costly. They will be costly. The water supply issues before us are complex. When you sit at the table and just listen to Brian and Rob and Vicki just sort of go back and forth about the complexity of these issues, it's amazing that we're going to be able to solve some of it. But one of the things that makes it more complex is how do our people that lead our regions, now we're talking about 7 counties and 86 municipalities and 3 water management districts, avoid the turf wars that have led to costly litigation in other parts of the state. And we all know what happened in Tampa. If we could spend the money on solving the problem instead of suing each other, that's going to be a win right there. So what kind of governance structure needs to be put in place to assure we have a sustainable water supply and manage that water supply? So that's the issue. And the university, in looking at the issue, said, well, okay, who can we get to talk about this? And so who else but the champion of environmental programs in the state of Florida, Senator Graham. So we reached high, and very fortunately, very lucky, Senator Graham was going to be in our community, and so he's here today, and he's going to discuss this issue with us. I want to just say a few words about the senator. He really needs no introduction here, I know that. But I want to remind you he's a former two-term governor of Florida, served for 18 years in the United States Senate, combined with 12 years in the Florida legislature. That's 38 years of public service. And he retired from public service in January of 2005 following the presidential campaign of 2004. He's been recognized for his leadership on issues ranging from education, economic development, health care, environmental preservation, and service on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, including 18 months as chairman of that committee. After he retired from public life, he didn't exactly retire when you read this. He served for a year as a senior fellow at the Kennedy School at Harvard. He's also been appointed by Barack Obama and served as co-chair of the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill and offshore drilling. He's had service as commissioner on the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, as chairman of the Commission on the Preservation, and as chairman of the Commission on the Preservation of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism, and service as a member of the CIA External Advisory Board. And I could go on and on there because there's more here, but I don't want to embarrass him, and I don't want to take a lot of your time. But I will say this: he's also the author of several books. And you need to read one called Keys to the Kingdom, which is a novel of suspense, which draws on his background in government. Now, he may not be John D. McDonald, but I understand it's a pretty good book, Senator. So while this is an incredible resume, I want to remind everybody that this is the senator and the governor that sort of invented the idea of work days. So in addition to all these other wonderful things he's done, this is truly a man of the people. He's been a police officer, he's been a busboy, he's been a railroad engineer, he's been a construction worker. He's basically been a garbage man. He worked as a factory worker and as a teacher. His most recent venture, and the one that I think will have a great effect on this state, or we hope that it will, is with the Conservation Coalition that he started, where they're looking at trying to preserve and prevent the reverse of 40 years of really important environmental legislation that took place in the state of Florida. So we've got a gentleman here today who has been an environmental champion and is an authority that can speak on water. And with that, I give you Senator Bob Graham.
Jim, thank you very much for that kind introduction. The reference to John D. McDonald, he tried hard to match my literary style, and I would not. I mean, the poor man is gone now. You shouldn't issue such attacks against him. Thank you very much for sharing this morning on a very important topic. You wouldn't be here if you did not care deeply about the future of this community and of this state. The issues that are going to be discussed this morning are at the core of the direction for the future of Florida. I'm very proud to have been given this opportunity. This is sort of my UCF week, and it has enlightened me as to the range of serious academic work that's going on at the largest university in our state. Yesterday I met with faculty who are establishing a new doctoral program in national securities studies. I believe that will be the first such level program in our state. And later today, I'm going to be meeting with the Joint Center on Citizenship, which is made up of the Lou Fry Center at the University of Central Florida and the immodestly named Bob Graham Center for Public Service at the University of Florida. And our purpose is to try to elevate the level of citizenship in Florida, particularly among young people. So I am very impressed and proud at the progress and leadership which the University of Central Florida is providing across a wide range of topics. Jim mentioned the Florida Conservation Coalition. This was an organization that was put together in the summer of 2011. 2011 was a disaster year for policy on land and water issues in Florida. As Jim said, 40 years of I think, very good work and experience in actually implementing policy was largely washed away. A number of us who'd been involved in that 40 years came together under the leadership of a number of important environmental organizations and over 1,000 individual citizens with the immediate goal of stopping the bleeding. We could not afford another session in 2012 of the likes of 2011. I think we were largely successful in that defensive mode. I'd like to recognize and because I'm too vain to put on my glasses. I can only see those closest to me. But Vicki Schenkel, who was a former secretary of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and has been one of our charter members and executive committee members, and Charles Pattison of 1,000 Friends of Florida, which has been a rock in these efforts. 2013 is going to be the year where we will look to go on the offensive and hopefully begin to restore some of the programs and enhanced programs that will be so significant in our state's future. I'll comment about that in a moment. With local organizations such as Friends of the Aquifer, the Florida Conservation Coalition is co-partnering in a program that's going to take place tomorrow. And I might say, I hope when we awaken tomorrow, we're going to have blue skies and bright sunshine, because we're going to be inviting people to come to the Aquifer Springs State Park tomorrow from 10 until 4 for a series of programs which are intended to educate the public about the status of the Aquifer River, which I will sort of give you a little clue, is not good, but is typical all over, particularly north central Florida. The kind of conditions that are occurring in the Aquifer are seen. Some of our iconic springs, such as Silver Springs, is in terrible shape, both in terms of its water flow and the quality of water. We don't have much time to come to the aid of our springs and streams. They're in the ICU now. We don't want them to go into the morgue. Let me, in an audience that I know is very knowledgeable about these subjects, but just to lay a platform, give a short history of water in Florida. It has been a powerful factor in our state's development from the very beginning. In a few weeks, we will be celebrating one of the great events in the history of the Western Hemisphere, and I think in world history, and that is the first Europeanization of North America. Ponce de Leon arrived in Easter of 1513 at St. Augustine. That event will be commemorated. There were a number of reasons that he came, but one, which is probably a mixture of myth and fact, was to find a fountain of youth. So it was the pursuit of water and its special qualities that contributed to the discovery and initial development of Florida. During the next 2 centuries, the water system of Florida played a critical role in our development. One of the great rivers in Florida, which is not as well known as I think it deserves to be, is the Apalachicola. It was the center of a thriving economy in our state in the pre-Civil War period, and happens to be the home of one of the 2 Floridians who are recognized by placement in the U.S. Capitol. Each state is entitled to recognize 2. The Apalachicola resident was a Mr. John Gorey, a medical physician who, in the course of developing treatment methods for malaria and yellow fever, stumbled into the basic physics of refrigeration. A few things have made as great a contribution to Florida habitability as air conditioning, and it's appropriate that John Gorey is our recognizee. After the Civil War, Florida was very committed to developing its large unsettled areas, and to do so became aggressively supportive of railroad construction. It put the credit of the state behind much of that railroad construction, and when those railroads went bankrupt, the state was in very serious financial problems, and one of the ways that they sought to get out of the problem was to begin selling off large blocks of land, including land in the Florida Everglades. The first efforts at draining the Everglades occurred in the 1880s as a result of one of those sales. For the next 75 to 100 years, Florida was schizophrenic over who we were and what were our fundamental values. The contesting definitions were commodity and treasure. The commodity that Florida was not a special place, that it was a common place, and that it was subject to whatever desires man wanted to have. In the case of the man who started the draining of the Everglades, Hamilton Diston, his goal was to make the Everglades look like Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which happened to be his home. That attitude of Florida as a commodity persisted up until the 1960s. And then two things happened. One was the Everglades suffered from an extensive drought and caught on fire. And intermittently, for a 2.5-year period, the Everglades burned. And there were tremendous smoke clouds for weeks on end from Homestead to Hobe Sound. It drove home to many Floridians who had been insensitive to this, that all of these changes as we commoditized Florida were having long-term permanent effects which largely were degrading the quality of our state. The second thing that happened was a group of younger people who were characterized by having grown up somewhere else in the United States, mainly New England, coming from families of sufficient affluence that they could afford to devote most of their time to civic activities, and who had come to Florida because of the qualities that it had on the day they crossed the border, and were becoming increasingly distressed at the changes that they saw. And finally, they were almost all Republicans. The Democrats have been in control of the state since the end of the Civil War. They had sanctioned, facilitated much of the rendering of Florida as a commodity. The Republican Party became the leader in reversing that. And for a period of about 20 years, there was a very aggressive effort to establish policies in the land and water management area that would protect, preserve, and enhance our state. That effort, which began the process of changing the definition of Florida to being a treasure, a special place that we had the privilege to live in today, but had a concomitant responsibility to be able to hand this off to our children and grandchildren as an even better place for tomorrow. Frankly, that battle between commodity and treasure, which many of us thought had been won for good, has now reopened. In the legislative session of 2011 was the beginning of a re-contest over what kinds of values we hold for Florida. One of the things that came out of that fire was a conference to try to answer the question, what was going wrong? And one of the lessons that came out of that conference was the close linkage between water policy and land policy. If you were going to protect the water, both in terms of its quantity and especially its quality, there had to be an awareness and sensitivity to what was happening on the land around the water. This led, among other things, to legislation such as the State Comprehensive Planning Act and the Land and Water Management Act, both of which stressed that linkage. That linkage is at the top of the list of major challenges that are facing Florida's land and water management today. At the 2011 session, the legislation which had tied those two together, and the organization, the Department of Community Affairs, which had the responsibility for overseeing that relationship, were largely abolished. Today, the FCC, for instance, has been trying to encourage the state to undertake the same kind of study that it did in the 1980s and 90s for the Everglades, and in the first decade of this century for the Aquifer River, which looked comprehensively at land and water issues and to develop a plan for the future. And the state thus far has refused to do that on the premise that there is no such linkage between land and water policy, and therefore they will not follow a precedent that made great contributions to our state. One of the major concerns of FCC is what we see as an incremental movement towards the privatization of water in Florida. There was a frontal attack to privatize Florida water at the early part of the last decade. Florida had the good fortune that the entity which was at the lead in that effort at frontal privatization was Enron. And when Enron was discovered to be the corrupt corporation that it was, that undercut their credibility and sunk the effort at privatization of water. As I look up, I see someone that I had missed before, and I want to recognize Lee Constantine, who has been a great leader of our FCC effort, and is one of that new generation of Republicans who understands the importance of these issues. One of my concerns in this current battle is the limited time horizon within which many of these issues are going to be seen. The reality is water is the fundamental natural resource of Florida. It's not only fundamental to our environment, it is fundamental to our economy. As Lee likes to say, very few people came to Florida because they wanted to see our strip malls. They did come to Florida because they wanted to experience our environment. And our water supply is at the core of much of that environment. Florida today has a population of approximately 20 million people. According to the U.S. Bureau of Census, the most conservative estimate of what our population will be in the year 2100, or approximately 87 years from today, and we can all gather 87 years from today, that the population at the low level will be 37 million and could be over 50 million. We ought to think in time horizons and in the scale of what kind of Florida we must protect today in order for that second and almost third Florida that will arrive in the next 3 generations to be able to enjoy what is ours. Another policy concern is the issue of governance. Within water policy, our emphasis has been on governance at the regional level, the 5 water management districts. I was there when this happened, and I know it was very politically sensitive to draw the boundaries of the 5 districts around watersheds and not around pre-existing political boundaries, such as counties. I think we were wise to develop the districts as nature had suggested they related, rather than as political history had drawn the lines. That system was premised on the thesis that the conditions in Northwest Florida, particularly the great rivers such as the Apalachicola, fundamentally different than the conditions in the St. Johns River Valley area or in the Everglades. And therefore, the districts should have significant self-determination to respond to their peculiarities. Today, that system is under attack as more and more decisions are moved from the 5 water management districts to the state, with the effort to impose a one-shoe-fits-all philosophy. This is particularly under consideration today as it relates to modifications in the consumptive use permit regulations. These are the regulations that govern how much water and under what conditions can be withdrawn from our underground aquifers and from our surface water conditions. A final policy issue is going to be the long-term protection of our water supply by relinking it to land issues and then to revitalizing our Florida Forever program, which has been the fundamental means by which Florida has been protecting its water supply through acquisition of the adjacent rivershed. Florida probably has in public ownership a larger percentage of its floodplain for its most important rivers than any other state in the nation. And that's the result of over 40 years of consistent acquisition of the land necessary to protect the water from inappropriate adjacent development and from non-source pollution. That program, for all intents and purposes, is expiring this year. The last payments will be made on the bond issues that have been issued. The program will be over. I think it's very important that we not allow a long gap in that land acquisition program, and we'll all have an opportunity to do something to avoid that. There is going to be a citizens petition called the Florida Legacy Program to place into our Constitution a provision that will commit a portion of the real estate transfer tax to a land acquisition program. That not only is important because it will be at the scale necessary to meet our needs, and over the last 2 decades, we've averaged between $200 and $300 million a year in land acquisition. Last year, it was $25 million. But also, it will give people the assurance that the program will be there next year, next decade, next generation. If you don't have that assurance, then there is becomes a political rush to get on this year's train for fear there won't be a next year's train. And that means that scientific priorities that are based on what's most critical for Florida and in what rank order will succumb to who has the most political influence to get their project on the list. So I think this is an extremely important initiative. I want to particularly commend groups like 1,000 Friends of Florida and the Audubon Society and Florida Wildlife Federation and others for their leadership in this effort, and I hope and encourage you to join that effort. Florida has been blessed. We live in one of the most physically beautiful and environmentally vibrant areas on the globe. We have a choice. We can see this as a matter of immediate benefit and profit by reverting to that definition that Florida is a commonplace and can be treated as a commodity. Or we can see it for what I think the leaders in this room see it as, and that is a rare treasure, a treasure that has brought this state from being one of the most remote, one of the poorest states in the nation, to now the fourth, soon to be the third largest state with a revitalizing, vibrant economy. That's the kind of Florida that I want my 11 grandchildren to inherit. We have the opportunity to preserve and enhance it to be that. Let us seize that opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
If you would be so kind as to have a seat here and sort of squeeze in, and let me get him his water, because that was a long speech. I think he needs a...
You think I need a Marco moment?
Yes, exactly. What we wanted to try and do with the rest of the morning, because we know that you have some questions and we're all on sort of a time clock here, is have our panel come up. I want to ask them to come up and sort of squeeze in. We need one more chair. If we can put that at the end, that'd be great. But if you all could come up, and I'll introduce them as they come up. But first is Victoria Schinkel. Vicki is the state director of the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy. She served on the boards of Audubon and 1,000 Friends, and member of the National Advisory Committee on Environmental Technology and Policy, and the Senior Advisory Committee at the Environmental Protection Agency. She was the Secretary of the Florida DER from '81 to '87, and is a member of the National Academy of Public Administration. In addition to Vicki, we have Brian Wheeler. If you come up, Brian. Brian is the Executive Director of the Toho Water Authority, so he's on the provider side, and has been there since its inception in October 2003, and previously served as the Director of the City of Kissimmee Department of Water Resources. And next is Rob Teagarden. Rob is the Vice President of Water Resource Policy, Planning, and Permitting for OUC, the reliable one. Those of us who have OUC know that is absolutely true. The 16th largest public power utility in the United States, and he's responsible for their water policy, planning, and permitting. Also, Rob, for those of us who know him, spent 5 years as a professional baseball player. So when he pitches to you, you know. Dr. Claire Connolly Knox. Claire is an assistant professor at the University of Central Florida in Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program Director in the School of Public Administration. She's originally from southern Louisiana. She was an interpretive specialist with the USGS National Wetlands Research Center for Coastal Wetlands Planning, and most importantly, in her dissertation, she dealt with the Everglades ecosystem, Senator. So she knows a little bit about that. And finally, Tanika Walker is our student representative. I won't ask you the first question, I promise, Tamika. Yeah. She's a master's candidate with a certificate in emergency management and homeland security at UCF, and she's originally from Jacksonville, Florida, and moved to Orlando in 2005 to get her bachelor's, and now is working on her master's degree. So we've got a really, really good panel here, and I want to ask the panel to either react to the governor's presentation or ask a question, and I'm going to start with Vicki.
Let's see if these things work. I don't think so. You can hear me all right? Great. That's terrific. I was the guinea pig for that. Well, of course, I would say it anyway because I think we all agree that Senator Graham gives a brilliant talk. But since he was my former boss and sort of my de facto current one, I have to reinforce that.
We'll cut your salary.
So I just wanted to bring some of the, just very briefly, some of the very important policy comments that we just heard about down to some of the more specific issues that we're facing. Now, I'm not going to talk about legislative things at the moment, but the essentially, the issue of water policy has largely devoluted down to, I would say, the relatively local levels of the water management districts and the local utilities working together. However, the state has chosen to step in and to give those entities some extremely specific guidelines with consumptive use permitting as to when permits could be issued and when they cannot be issued, as opposed to the past when the state water policy would say more, these things are priorities to restore natural systems, to provide safe public water supply, to provide sustainable water supply. They're now saying issue a permit if X, Y, and Z is met and issue it for this long. So one of the struggles that I think we all have to face is now that at the moment, and I have old friends here, utility directors, some of whom have built the most fantastic wastewater treatment plants in the country for recycling water. So I have to say this as a generalization, as a policy generalization, not as an individual motivation. The department is extremely focused on engineering aspects of water supply, and they have chosen to rely very heavily on their colleagues who provide public water supply, which is extremely important. The problem is the constituency that has to look at water goes beyond the needs of individual large cities in particular, because we have to think of economic development in the future, we have to think of the environment, and we have to think of how the balance between small cities and big cities are going to be allowed to grow. So as we watch the power devolve towards the local utility sector, we have to figure out how to enlarge that dialogue so these other factors can be brought in with the same level of professionalism. So that's just something I wanted to emphasize, again, without suggesting that people don't want to do the right thing, but simply people have different areas of expertise and focus.
Great, thank you. Brian?
I guess I'm one of the people supposed to give a contrary opinion of some sort anyway. But first off, by saying that I think, as I said at the table, I think we're all in the same, have the same goals in mind in the same business. I get up every morning with the idea that I'm out to serve the same public that the water management districts and the DEP and everybody else. The public they serve are the customers that pay my bills, and I set out to serve. And I don't think anybody in my profession has ever gone out with the idea that we were out to damage the environment. I think we want to protect the environment. But having said that, a couple of things I think speaking to Vicki's change in policy, in my first 20+ years here as a person providing environmental utility services in Central Florida, I think we were largely shut out of the dialogue in association with water policy. I think we were basically dictated to by both DEP and the water management districts, and for a long period of time that was okay, because resource-wise there was plenty of resource both in terms of water and in terms of money. But that is all changed in this environment we're in now. There's a limited amount of resource in terms of water, and there's also a limited amount of resource in terms of funding. And in the future, we're going to be asked to expend significant costs of money to solve the problems that Senator Graham has brought forth, both in terms of water quality and water quantity. And I think it's very important that when we make those decisions, that we have the right facts and we apply those resources in the right manner. Because I think we are engaged finally at the table, and I would agree with Vicki that I think we need to have more stakeholders at the table. But I think it's finally the time when we have brought ourselves as the water providers have gotten the opportunity to sit at the table and bring our resources to the table in terms of technology and expertise, and have a dialogue. Not that we want anything particular, but we want to know that when the answers come forth and we're sent back to our customers and said we have to spend millions of dollars and raise your bills, that we can look them in the face and say this is the right thing to do because this is what the science tells us to do, and this is how we're going to preserve the environment that we have in Florida.
Thank you. Rob?
Good morning, everybody. Is this on? I was intrigued by what Senator Graham said, the commodity versus treasure. I don't have the experience in living in Florida as many years as Senator Graham, but I came in '75. I took aquatic limnology, a bunch of environmental courses at the University of Florida, and I saw a population grow from 8 million to 18 million people. What I'm proud about today is we're working on solutions trying to manage scarce resources and work with all parties to do new things and accommodate that 50 million people and think in longer term perspective. So I'm very proud of the water we have on the table in front of you. I'm proud of the way we use water resources and reclaim it at the end. And when we have the opportunity in front of us to work with a lot of network industries, the gas companies, redoing I-4 coming through downtown, telecommunications, other very, very important networks to a very complex society, we need to work together and look at how we're going to accommodate all those resources. And I'm again, very proud I'm working at those solutions.
Thanks, Rob. Claire?
Thank you. Governor Graham, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come and talk to us. And I'm going over the history of the Everglades and looking at the fact that the fires was a catalyst to get policy change happening. And if you look a little bit more recently to some other natural man-made disasters with Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and then the BP oil spill, that has allowed the focus and the discussion at the national level to be looked at Louisiana coastal wetlands and realize that wetlands waters have an intrinsic value in and of themselves. And so my question I wanted to pose to you, based off of your experience with being a governor and a senator, is what do you foresee being a potential catalyst to get us to change our relationship with water?
Well, history would tell you that the catalyst is most likely to be some highly visible negative event. If the Aquifer River collapsed, if the Apalachicola, which I visited just 2 weeks ago and which is in very bad shape, one of the great shellfish areas in the world, is now shut down and appears as if it will be shut down for the foreseeable future. Those are the kind of events, I think, which dramatize the consequences of lack of attention or inappropriate policies, and which can be the catalyst for the sort of significant reforms that occurred in Florida in the late 60s and 70s.
Tanika, you're on.
I know, right? Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to say I've heard you speak of your grandkids and the fact that the Florida that's being handed to them is not the same one that was handed to you. And I do agree with that because going through the St. Johns River goes through Jacksonville. And I remember going on the taxi, the cabs that go through the river, and at the bottom they have the glass so you can see it. And I remember telling my grandparents, why do they have that? It's brown. And they told me at one point it was clear and you can actually see the marine life in there. And I guess my question to you is, as a future leader, what can I do now today as a student in order to reverse the side effects that have happened to our water systems?
Well, one would be to develop the strongest personal background in the science of these issues. I think a key to our future is the willingness to make decisions based on our best understanding of the system and how it will respond to different patterns of behavior, and then to develop, second, some of the political skills necessary to convince decision makers that adopting that best science is in the best interest of the public of Florida, and maybe even suggest it might be in their best political interest to be on the right side of these questions.
Great. Well, I want to thank the panel because I asked them, I said, don't make a lot of long statements. We want to leave time for people to ask questions. So, unlike a lot of these, we actually have some time for questions from the audience, or to Senator Graham, or to the panel. So, let me open it up to those brave enough to ask a question.
Can I make a comment?
You can make a comment, certainly.
I'm not going to talk about any of these promises. Anyway, Senator Graham, back in around 87, 88, we had a gentleman in Orlando, Florida, by the name of George Barley. Mm-hmm. And George was a developer and a very successful businessman who loved to fish in the Florida Keys. And apparently one day when he was bone fishing, he noticed all this algae in the water, and he was not happy about that. So he essentially traced the source of that problem to the Everglades. And in Central Florida, you're talking about these catastrophic or major events that would change people's view and get them involved. Those who were here and knew George Barley, I know you had to, Lee, he was someone who was extremely passionate about things. And all of us in the industry of planning and engineering were quite surprised when someone who was kind of typecast as a developer who would put up a strip mall if he could, became this great champion of the restoration of the Everglades, and essentially rained terror down on Big Sugar, as some of us know. And Vicki, I know you saw a lot of him. But here's a Democrat who at the time really moved in a completely different direction and mobilized a lot of very important people. Do you have much interaction with Mr. Barley back in those days?
Yes, and and of course his wife, Mary, continues to be very active, particularly through the Everglades Foundation. I guess in addition to having an event which captures the attention of the public, you need to have some George Barleys, the evangelist who can explain the significance of that event and then what it suggests we should be doing to avoid a repetition and to move forward on a better path. George certainly captured all those qualities.
If I could reminisce just for a minute about George Barley, because he, before his interest in the Everglades started, although, you know, I'm sure he was fishing down there, but he was on the Environmental Regulation Commission. I don't exactly know, Senator, how he became on our Environmental Regulation Commission, but he did something very, very fine locally, because the Aquifer River was one of the first non-governmentally designated park areas national government that was made an outstanding Florida water through the very strong work of the people along the Aquifer, but he was on the commission at the time, and we almost wrecked his chances for saving the Everglades because in his enthusiasm, he tipped over his canoe, fell into the water, and lost a $800 pair of sunglasses on that day. And not only was I afraid he was going to vote against it, but that he might not fulfill the promise that he showed. But of course, he proved us all wrong, and he was just a terrific commission member. And I think one of the things that we all think about is we look at you, for example, and other people around the world, around our state, who are the next George Barleys, whether they're developers or they have some other passion normally in life, but who's going to form the leadership? We've all remarked in the Conservation Coalition that there's people our age, and there may be people 10 years younger, but there is a huge gap in leadership on environmental issues in the public. There's a lot of activity on campuses, and I'm controversial, so those of you who don't know that I speak out. An awful lot of the activity seems to be out in the web rather than in the body politic. I think there's a lot of disaffect among students and maybe people a little bit older that we've all disappointed them, and so therefore they need to act separate from that. I have to tell you that if all you need is a day in Tallahassee to see the damage that can be done in 24 hours in Tallahassee would outdo everything all of you could possibly do on the web in one day. So what I would urge is for the new George Barleys and Georgina Barleys to step forward, come to Tallahassee and speak your mind. Just get up there, you're citizens. Say what's important to you. Be heard.
Very interesting. Good comment. Yes, let's start back here. 2 questions.
Good morning. My name is Jacques Coulon. I'm one of the students at UCF, and thank you for coming to the whole panel. One thing that we do a lot of work on and look at are policy tools. And I know you mentioned that one of the things that may lead to change in Florida are those catalyst events, those that, the Aquifer River or, responses to BP, that type of thing. But for those, at least from my experience from where I stand, I see a lot of quick action and quick change. So I wanted to get the panel's reaction to see what policy tools or legislative tools are there that not only respond just to that event, but also are a little longer lasting and make more of an impact past just that initial event.
So what are the policy tools? Okay. Anyone on the panel want to jump at that one?
Well, I would follow up, I think, on something the senator referred to, but he didn't refer to the specific area. Under Chapter 380, there's something called a Resource Planning and Management Committee statute that ultimately could lead to an area of critical state concern. When we started our first Springs effort, Lee, as you'll remember, we had a petition that ultimately got signed, I believe, by 18,000 Floridians and brought to the Capitol to ask the governor and cabinet to establish a resource planning and management committee. The advantage of those is it brings together all the relevant state and local agencies and local governments to solve a specific set of problems, recognizing that transportation, that utilities, that city planning, county planning, regulatory agencies are all needed in order to solve problems. And the example maybe I'll give you in Tallahassee of this complete dysfunction is, first of all, the petition sort of landed on the governor's desk, was laterally arabesque to the Secretary of the Department of Environmental Protection. And I think you've all read and heard that the department is focused on springs protection, but it's extremely naive I would say, of the current administration to think that any one department can solve these issues. If you look at what's going on in Tallahassee, for example, there are bills hadn't been filed yet for this year, but to restrict local governments' abilities to regulate fertilizer use on lawns. Nutrients are a huge problem in every single water body of Florida, from the Everglades to Wakulla Springs. There's bills to prohibit the inspection of septic tanks, which are between fertilizers and septic tanks, at least on the Silver River, been shown to be 70% of the pollution are coming from those sources. And you could go down, those are the ones that come to mind. So unless we say we really love these things and we want to protect them, you cannot just turn to one agency and say, fix it. And so that's an area in the statute. It's there. It was successful in the Florida Keys. A similar effort, as you pointed out, was successful in the Aquifer River. The Kissimmee River would never have been restored without a resource planning and management committee, which brought together the water management districts, all the farmers, all the counties, all the cities. So we have to tell our government, if we want to fix these things, I think we talked about collaborative work. There is a place in the statute for that.
Thank you. Yes.
So Senator Graham mentioned that the water management districts were based upon watersheds. And in this area, we're crisscrossed by a couple water management districts that in a low-lying state were the headwaters for water flowing to the north and to the south. Could the Senator discuss that a little bit, and how our activities impact the rest of the state?
Yes, in fact, three of the water management districts intersect in the vicinity of where we're sitting this morning. That fact has been the justification for some of the efforts to remove power from the water management districts and vest them in the Department of Environmental Protection in Tallahassee. I think there are issues that need to be dealt with, but I do not believe that the fundamental principle of local management of local water supplies because of local specific conditions should be overcome by that geographic fact that three water management districts meet in the middle of the state. I think some kind of stakeholder gathering, as I understand, is underway in Central Florida, where you get people who know the issues, can identify things like, for instance, apparently there have been different hydraulic models used in the three water management districts. So if you feed in the same data to the St. John's or the South Florida, the Southwest Florida water management district, you'd get a different outcome because the algorithms are different. That seems to a person who a year ago didn't know what the word algorithm meant, would be a fairly straightforward issue to deal with, and apparently, in fact, at least that specific one is being dealt with by developing a harmonious model that all three districts will utilize. So I think the challenges of having three districts come together in one geography is real, but there are solutions to that that are focused on the specific area affected, and it does not require a new philosophy of who's going to control water in Florida.
Right.
And maybe just a little more context on that. First, I think, and speaking about the water management district boundaries, I think that some of you, I know a number of people in the room are aware, but some people in the room may not be aware that the water management districts were as the Senator said, were constructed based upon watershed. The unfortunate thing is, as we all know, within groundwater doesn't follow watershed. And so the complication that has come forth in Central Florida is the fact that if I my utility is in 2 water management districts. It's half in South Florida and it's half in St. John's. I can go put a well down 100 yards inside the South Florida water management boundary and get a permit from South Florida. But when I start drawing water out of that well, I'm going to have impacts in St. John's, and the same thing. And so as we begin to work on the aquifer, groundwater withdrawals have an impact across all 3 water management district boundaries. And this has been a dilemma in terms of trying to solve the water supply problem in Central Florida. Again, as the senator has kind of outlined, is that you have 3 sets of criteria that the districts look at, 3 different ways of interpreting data, and so when we go to get permits, it creates confusion and conflict. So there is an effort underway, which the senator alluded to, is what's called the Central Florida Water Initiative, which is an effort to bring, which right now is an effort that has the 3 water management districts, the Department of Agriculture, DEP, and the public water suppliers working to develop the technical information, the technical background of just what does the aquifer look like in Central Florida today. Not, what does it look like, how is it reacting, develop that single model, and then come forth with a set of technical data that says here's what the situation is today, and then project what we already think is going to happen tomorrow, and then see how that's going to impact the environment, and then start to look at, there's going to be some significant policy decisions that are going to have to be made to decide, because I think I'm been around enough and been doing this long enough to realize that there isn't enough groundwater in Central Florida to satisfy the future growth demands. And I'm not just talking growth demands of the population. I'm talking about the agricultural demands, which is also a fundamental part of the economy of Central Florida. And there's going to have to be some significant policy decisions made. And I think everybody needs to be, as Vicki has brought forward, everybody needs to be at the table when we start to have those discussions, because they have wide-ranging implications, but we all need to have that technical basis, and that's what we missed for the last, in my opinion, the last 20 years, is actually the technical understanding of just what's actually happening in the groundwater within the aquifer. And hopefully we're going to have, I don't think the answer, but we're going to have a better picture. The picture's still going to be a little fuzzy. It's not going to be clear, but it's going to be clearer than what it was a few years ago.
So let's sort of stay on that for a second, because we talked about governance. The senator talked about governance. He challenged us with what happens in 2100 when there's 37 million or 50 billion people in the state. Let's drill it down a little further. Let's just say 50 years. What does the governance of our water supply systems look like in that 50 years? Commissioner Constantine's got a water supply system. Toho's got one. OUC's got one. Mr. Councilman Kilsheimer back there has one in Apopka. So what does the governance look like in terms of how we're managing that water supply? Do we look like Tampa? Is it some type of an authority, or is there some other model?
No, I'll take that one.
It wasn't a softball, but it was sort of a curveball. But yeah, take it.
Well, I think that I think one of the models is, and I don't like the Tampa model, because the Tampa model occurred what I call the gun to the head approach, and there's still a lot of people in the Tampa area that are unhappy with the result. I mean, I think the results that are coming out of Tampa Bay are improvements, but I think there's still a lot of people unhappy about how that happened. I'm a firm believer, based on my experience, that some of this has got to be built from the ground level up. Through the people have got to develop relationships. They got to be committed, develop relationships, and build up. And of course, Toho Water Authority is one example, because Toho Water Authority is the merger of the city of Kissimmee and Osceola County in water supply into a single entity. And then beyond that, in the last several years, as some of you may not be aware, over the last 5-6 years, the utilities that are in the South Florida part of the water management district in Central Florida have been working together on a number of issues, and out of that has evolved what's called the Water Cooperative of Central Florida, which is an entity created through interlocal agreement between the Toho Water Authority, the City of St. Cloud, Polk County, and Orange County, and we are in the process of our very first project is going through an evaluation of our water distribution systems and the interlinking of those distribution systems to create a single network, so we'll have the capability of moving water across the region and not become individual isolated utilities, but start to look at our water supply on a regional basis as opposed. And I think that's the type of thing that has to grow up organically. And there has to be motivation. There has to be incentives. I think that Senator Graham put there. We came together not voluntarily, when South Florida came to us and said, we're going to classify you all as competing uses, they forced us into a room, and in that room we sat down and said we can either work together or we can work in opposition. We chose to work together, and that has built a relationship over the last 6 to 7 years.
Great. Thanks. Anyone else want to take that?
Well, I agree with that comment completely. You know, of course there'll be bumps because there's always political figures, and not everybody is as selfless, I think, as you are. But I think one of the duties, though, in that case, is for the water management districts collectively, especially in the Everglades, to develop reservations on their statutes to protect the water that, with proper data that the statute requires, to set limits to protect the natural bodies of water, and minimum flows and levels, which are usually a post hoc determination of what water levels should have been set before all the permits have been issued. If the government, with its public input and statutory direction, does that, then you have some parameters to work together and decide what are the best cost and best and most reliable systems that you can develop. But it's got to be a partnership.
Yeah, that's great, very common. Something to study. We have time for a few more questions. Yes.
Is it viewed that the way we landscape our Florida with our green grasses and all this as a significant problem, or is that a minor problem? In my mind, it's significant with the fertilizer, the pesticides, and the vast amounts of water I think it uses, and I'm not an expert. Is that a problem that can be legislatively addressed, or do we just keep on watering and fertilizing?
So is how we landscape and treat that landscaping an issue?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think here's the thing. Until we learn as citizens, or we're regulated as citizens, that we can't have Cotswold-style grasses in Florida because our soils are just, they're basically nets. We have to be more realistic about what's natively appropriate, what we really need, and what we don't. And we shouldn't all be lobbying our legislature or allow lawn management companies to lobby the legislature to tell our local governments that we can't regulate how much fertilizer goes on. Farmers, to a large degree, have an incentive because that stuff costs money and makes their products more expensive. But again, it's a question. We know what needs to be done. There's no secret about it. But as citizens, we have to say, not only are we willing to implement this one by one, but we want everybody else to do it. And, some of that is formal and some of it's legislated. And I was just looking at the water consumption, and I don't know if this is correct, in Orange County, but it's higher than the state average, and it's increasing for whatever reason. So there's something rotten in Denmark there that is going, a little bit wrong direction. So I think this is something citizens can really work on.
Commissioner, do you have a question? No? Comment. Go ahead.
Since we've talked a lot about the legislature, and I'm, recently left the legislature, I just wanted to comment a little bit about what the governor and what Vicki's talking about. The question that you had, young man, the fact of the matter is that the legislature reacts to immediacy, and that's unfortunate. We are losing an iconic river and spring, Silver Springs, and nobody reacts to it. In fact, they do the opposite. As Vicki mentioned, many of you know, and it was misrepresented a great deal about a 1 every 5 year inspection for septic tanks. Before that ink was dry, and I was leaving, they were trying to get rid of it. But you said, how do we help as individuals? We have a legislator in Northwest Orange County that represents part of the Aquifer, that's leading the charge for the preemption of fertilizer on local governments, and fertilizer regulation. we have a legislator from Lake County who is trying to tell the water management districts and DEP, the governor talked about Florida Forever, in a bill that's been filed, that before you can buy, local government can buy land for protection, we have to sell the same acre. So you can't do it, and then put regulations on it. So when you ask that, and it seems that nobody in our area or any other area seems to get excited that they're doing that. We do react to major catastrophes. You know, we wouldn't have a unified building code in Florida if it wasn't for Hurricane Andrew. But the fact of the matter is, this legislature reacts financially and still has not seen the correlation between economics and the environment. Haven't seen it yet. We're trying to make them see it, but they haven't seen it yet. But what the major disaster that's going to protect our water is going to be when the cost of water starts rising. And it's going to rise very quickly. People do not understand that. It's going to rise fast, and OUC can speak of this. It's going to rise fast, and it's going to cost a whole lot more for all of us. And Floridians right now are using more water than their neighbors, than other states. So that to me is, this is an economic issue. This is not, environmental issue to protect, be warm and fuzzy and protect, all the critters. This is an economic issue for the future of Florida.
This, and then one in the back, and then I think we're done.
Thank you, Senator Graham, panel. Judy Pizzo, Floridian by choice. My question isn't really a question. Maybe it's a statement, and everyone has led up to it. We've talked here about the conditions of our springs and our watershed and the Everglades. And on the heels of the governor renewing the leases for the sugarcane industry there in the Everglades, it's truly a puzzle. How do we incentivize, how do we educate the public to the consequences of what's going on every day?
How do we educate the public?
Personally, as the public, I feel that the way to educate them is to show them what's happening, not so much right now in real time, because you pass by a river and you say, oh, it hasn't rained for the last few weeks. But to really show them where the growth is going and what is going to happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and give them the tools that actually make a difference. Like I said, as a student, I wonder how I can make a difference, and I'm guilty of going on the web. But to be told that I can go to Tallahassee and my voice can be heard, just encourage people to do that. But first we have to educate them and show them where we're going, and then allow them to do what they need to do to improve that.
Excellent. Very well said.
And could I take your point? Because if, I don't know how many students there are right here, but if all 10 or 15 or 20 of you had been in Tallahassee on the day that happened, because I was there, and the environmental community got a little crosswise with each other in getting in front of the governor and cabinet. That's an open meeting, open to all public, and you can speak there. If they had gotten more pushback from members of the public, and you'd be surprised, when I say more, you're talking maybe 4 or 10 people who just state the facts as they are, very plainly, because even the environmental lobbyists, I shouldn't say even, like all lobbyists, they have to get along because they have one bill hanging on another bill, or they have this deal they're trying to work out. It is so important for people who are not hampered by having to have those day-to-day relationships. You'd be amazed how embarrassed you can make people over 50 feel when you come and talk the truth. Try it. You got nothing to lose.
That's great. One more. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Just one final comment.
One of the things that has characterized Florida through much of its history is it's not a state. It's a series of city-states. It's like northern Italy. And people don't know very much about what's happening even 100 miles away. Let me ask a question. I'm not saying this to embarrass anybody, but just to use you as a sampling group. How many of you have been to the Apalachicola River? Okay, well, that's surprising. How many of you have been to Florida Bay? That's the place where George Barley became interested in the Everglades. Right, right. Well, congratulations on so many of you for traveling. So the, but I think one of the things that have tried to promote is to look for ways to get Floridians to know Florida. If you can see the range of beauty in our state, and also see some of the ugliness of what's happened to that beauty, I think it changes not only your knowledge level but your emotional commitment. I've been suggesting, for instance, that the very active river keepers of the Apalachicola ought to invite the river keepers of the St. John's to do a home and home series of one going to the other and vice versa. I would encourage universities, you students, I presume mainly from the University of Central Florida, maybe ought to try to talk to your fellow students from the University of West Florida and have an exchange in which you can see some of their issues and they can become familiar with ours. We need to build a generation not of Mantuas and Paduas and all those little states in the hills in Italy, but a generation of real Floridians who have a depth of understanding and caring about the state. I think it will result in a more motivated political Florida.
Okay, what a challenge. What a great idea, students. One more. There was one more somewhere right there. Okay.
Yeah, my name is Mike Harden. I work for the University of Central Florida as a researcher in the area of stormwater management, BMPs, and erosion and sediment control. Just as a citizen driving around, it's rather disheartening to see kind of the way developers treat the issues of erosion and sediment control and stormwater runoff. When I obviously personally have experience with the great technologies that are out there that are just being ignored. I mean, just to see silt fence as the only erosion and sediment control technique being implemented is, I mean, quite frankly, ridiculous. I mean, it does not do a whole lot. And I'm just wondering, it seems to me that the enforcement is not sufficient to keep up with the development. So, kind of what can be done to either encourage developers to do the right thing or use the right technology in the right place, or to increase enforcement in order to protect our water bodies?
I'm encouraged by your question because we are actively looking at stormwater reuse and using that valuable resource where it's needed. So many times in Florida, water's the enemy. We deal with those peak flows, peak events, and flooding becomes our concern for 4 to 6 months of the year. And then 4 to 6 months of the year, we're dealing with the other extreme. So earlier this week, I met in Tallahassee with DOT. They're a big agency that is not open to innovation, but they're talking to DEP and they're looking around the state at where this practice might be best applied. Marty Wanalista is on that team, another UCF champion water quality person. We need to do that kind of innovation. Back to the policy question asked earlier, people need to value water in their hearts, know where they're at in the watershed, and act locally. If they do that and look at all the values of water that you see in your own life, from drinking water to sanitation to quality, all these different ways. You can tell that to your local representative, your local officials, and again, make us a stronger Florida and work on water quality, watershed, stormwater pond, volume, quality, all at the same time. But you need to educate yourself and act locally in your watershed.
Thank you. I want to thank the panel. I want to particularly thank Senator Graham, who is truly a treasure for the state of Florida and reminds us of not only the leadership we had, but the type of leadership we need if we're going to have a great future here. So again, UCF, we very much appreciate your being here, Senator and panel, and thank you all very much.